All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Big Ten Show. I am joined here with my co-host, Sonny Verma, and John D'Adamo. John D'Adamo is the host of Michigan Wolverine Live over at the Voice of College Football and the Ocho. So, excited to have John on, resident Michigan fan, if you couldn't tell by the name of his the show that he hosts. But, John, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. We're at the national championship, man. I couldn't be happier.
Exactly. Yep. John, a little under the weather, but still, powering through to give us some of his time. So appreciate having you on. Yep. And then,
John, has this been the busiest week of your life when it comes to all this stuff?
I don't know if it's been busier. I think it's just been different. Because usually I go on a lot of shows and give my perspective on things, but I think it's it's more frequent for sure, because it's like this is the big one. Michigan has literally always been at that point where it's like almost like close but no cigar, right? It's always been so the fact that I just saw Jim Harbaugh next to the national championship trophy in the press conference that they just did. I'm just like, this is the next step. So that's part of it.
Yeah, exciting for y'all. Exciting for Washington. Just a great game we have on tap, just stylistically. So Sonny, I'll let you take it away. You can go ahead and give him the first question here that you wanted to ask.
Well, John, let's just start with what you just brought up. Like, for so long you were close, we couldn't ultimately beat, Ohio State, successful, winning 9 games, but you just couldn't get over the hump. And, right before the COVID year, there was a pretty big percentage of Wolverines fans who wanted to move on from Harbaugh, who were practically begging him to take a job. Now you guys are here, clearly the best program in the Big Ten, in the national championship. You've been number one. Was it wire to wire? Or if not, you've been clearly one of the best teams in the league. What's the difference between, what shift happened in the last 4 years to help you get over the edge?
Yeah. And I'll be the first to admit, I was one of the people that, I was very excited when Harbaugh came in the beginning. Really liked seeing some of the successes early on. He's a proven winner everywhere he goes. He turns around San Diego. He turns around Stanford, goes to the Orange Bowl with Andy Luck. He turns around the 49ers and gets within one play of winning a Super Bowl. And then he goes to Michigan and goes from Brady Hoke and the dark ages. I was in Ann Arbor during the dark ages, and turned it around 5 to 10 wins like that, right? But then you start to have that can't beat Ohio State, that COVID era. You almost lose to Rutgers. Cade McNamara has to bail us out of losing to Rutgers. And I was on Mark Rogers. I said, it's time for a change. And they did change. They just didn't change exactly in the way that I expected. What happened was essentially Ward Manuel, the athletic director, he has a conversation with Jim Harbaugh. Says, "Look, man, love you. We go back to the '80s, and we want this to work. You were one of our best quarterbacks ever. You're an amazing coach, great leader of men, all that stuff. But we got to start winning. So we're going to reduce your salary by 50%." And we're going to put it in incentive bonuses instead. So if you would hit certain things, you get incentives. And, Harbaugh could have done 2 things with that information. He could have gone to the, interviewed with the Jets. The Jets was a potential at that point for him that was being discussed. Or he could have sat a year and then, he's richer than, God, he's got plenty of money. He's not hurting for money, right? So he could have taken a year. He could have done a lot of things, right? But what does he do? He takes the 50% pay cut like a man. He sacks up, and he basically fires Don Brown, who everybody had figured out, one-trick pony, blitz happy defensive coordinator. And if you have a physically equal or better team to Michigan, you're going to beat Don Brown's defense. It's just crossing routes and you can beat it, right? So he fires Don Brown. He demotes Josh Gaddis to an honorary OC position, and he installs the 2009 Stanford playbook. So those are the things that he did from an O&D perspective. And then overall, the culture shift became more of a player-led culture. And you hear people like Aiden Hutchinson talking about it, like what that shift looked like in 2021. You hear Blake Corum in the conference yesterday talking about it. So those are some of the things that they did just from a personnel perspective to change the culture, go back to Michigan's pound the rock identity, but with a modern twist. And, he calls his brother, and he says, hey, John, yeah, I'm kind of up against it here, man. Can you help me out? And his brother says, well, I can give you Mike McDonald, or I can give you Jesse Minter. And he said, I'll take Mike McDonald. Mike McDonald comes in, installs a 4-3 multiple defense, the Ravens style defense that has done exceptionally well in the NFL now too. Obviously, we see them being number one in the NFL. And this last 3 years has been with that system. And it was built to beat a high octane hybrid air raid kind of team like in Ohio State 2021 and 2022, which is why I'm really excited about Washington 2023, because I think that is a pretty good parallel, that Michigan under Don Brown would probably get destroyed by this Washington team. Michigan under Jesse Minter and his defense, I think is going to be it's going to be a phenomenal heavyweight matchup.
Yeah, exactly. And just kind of going off of that and looking at, the current state of Michigan's defense and kind of the Alabama-Michigan game in general, the biggest test was Jalen Milroe, containing him. And, the Alabama defense did a great job. They, sacked him. They made his life hectic. How much of that do you think will carry over into this game with Penix and just kind of what are some of the unique things that Penix offers that maybe Jalen Milroe couldn't take advantage of against the defense?
Yeah, so Jalen Milroe, we all know what he could do with his legs. Mm-hmm. He was the best by far running quarterback we faced. The second best was probably Heinrich Harburg. So pretty good there with the run game. His other strength we know is the deep shot. So what did Michigan do? Covered the deep shots really well with great secondary play and just edge rushing to make Milroe uncomfortable. Braden McGregor had a phenomenal game in terms of just rushing the quarterback, but really 6 sacks. So his ability to do a deep shot when his O-line was giving him nothing, it took him not out of the equation, but it made his 2 big strengths. One of them was very nullified, right? Yep. So let's go to Penix. So Penix, on the other side of the coin, can basically do anything on the field. Mm-hmm. I think Penix is the best quarterback we have faced since C.J. Stroud. Mm-hmm. And some Georgia fans were telling me, well, what about our quarterback? And I said, well, Stetson's great, but he's a system. He is a system guy. C.J. Stroud would just rip it for 400 yards in those games. So I comp him to C.J. Stroud a little. We played Michael Penix in 2020. So when Michael Penix was at Indiana, he went for 350 and 3 touchdowns against Michigan's high school level 2020 team. And and against Don Brown's defense, yep. Really tore it up. He has such a good vision. He can make any play on the field, and he has in my opinion, 3 of the best wide receivers in football right now. Yeah. Roman Dunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. Just absolutely world-class players, up there with Marvin Harrison Jr. as far as the best receivers we've faced. I think it's going to be very tough to contain him. If he is a wide-open guy, forget about it. It's probably going for a touchdown. So the best that I think that Michigan can do is the CJ Stroud playbook. Try to limit what he gets. Try to hold him to field goals instead of touchdowns. But it's going to be tough. And their passing game is best in the country, #1 in the country. It's their rush that I think we can really exploit, because their rush is 100th in the country.
Yeah,
that might be something we talk about later. But yeah, Penix is a fantastic quarterback. There's no question.
Yep, for sure.
I mean, we can go ahead and just talk about it now. You kind of alluded to what Michigan has to take advantage of when it comes to the two teams going at it. 4.5 point favorites. I actually saw this about an hour before we started recording at Circa. It's now a 5.5 point spread moving in Michigan's direction. Mm-hmm. What's the game script for Michigan to come out victorious on Monday?
Yeah. So there's a few things. We first need to take into account the larger context, which is this is the healthiest JJ McCarthy has been since the first half of the season. You also have to keep in mind that we've been playing defenses, no offense to Washington, but the defenses that we have been playing have been like top 20 in the country, right? We're talking about Iowa. We're talking about Alabama. We're talking about Ohio State. We're talking about Penn State. Those are top 20 defenses. Washington is 94th in the country. So what I think you're going to see is the best Michigan's offense has looked since that first 6 games, with a few exceptions. We've had some good play. I'm not saying our offense has sucked this last 6 games, but if you go back to like Minnesota, if you go back to the early where we were just slinging it, we were running it at will. I think that there are many more keys for Michigan to win than for Washington to win. Washington, their key is Michael Penix has to play basically perfect Superman ball. And I think he could. However, I think Michigan has like 6 different ways they could win, right? So the script, I would say, is play the ball that they play. Joel Klatt calls him a boa constrictor, right? Mm-hmm. Control time of possession. Long scoring drives with a mix of run and pass. The run defense for Washington is 41st in the country, but I watched that Texas game and they were letting Texas get all kinds of yards on them, 6.4 yards per carry for Texas. So I think that Blake Corum will be able to run for 200, 250. And then you got to pass the ball. And Roman Wilson showed brief signs versus Bama of what he can do. He is our deep threat. There's no question. So you've got to get the ball out to Roman Wilson. Cornelius Johnson's more of your short to medium range threat wide receiver. Tyler Morris, that running speed ability. But you also utilize Colston Loveland and AJ Barner. Colston Loveland is a phenomenal tight end. And every time it feels like every time JJ throws him the ball, he catches it, with a few exceptions. He's pretty much automatic. They have a great chemistry. And so I think that with all that said, if you have a game plan of limiting of controlling time of possession, and I'm talking offense first, controlling time of possession, and then obviously, mix of play action, deep shots, split zone in the run game, utilize that O-line that's been doing so well. On offense, I think that's the playbook. And then on defense, you've really got to contain Penix enough. Just like CJ Stroud in 2021, 2022, Penix is going to get his yards. He's probably going to go for 300, 350. Like, just contain him to the 300s and contain him to like 3 passing touchdowns. And then on the run, shut it down. Because the unfortunate reality is that their running back, Dylan Johnson, is injured. He is going to play, but I watched that injury. He is not going to be at 100%. No. There's no way in hell. So I think you're going to see a lot of Will Nixon being utilized to back Dylan Johnson up, because there's no way he's going to be able to be the feature back the entire game with what I saw. So you contain those two, and you limit Penix as much as possible, and I think it's pretty clear who's going to win the game.
Yeah, to your point, a lot of people are focusing on, just because the polarizing Washington offense, right? It's sexy. It's a lot of the casual fans got to see that on display. So a lot of these fans and stuff like that are tuning into this haven't seen Michigan play this year. And what Michigan doesn't jump off the screen if you're a casual fan. It's really, they're 13th in time of possession. So it's all about controlling the clock, establishing their game plan and just kind of wearing you down over time. So with that being said, do you think that the Washington defense disparity versus the Michigan offense is enough to make up for that, on the other side of the ball, just with how dominant Michigan's defense has been? Do you think there's enough for Washington to make up on the other side of the ball? Because it seems like that's where the true advantage is, kind of like you were talking about, where there's a lot of flaws in Washington's defense. But is it going to be enough? And what do you think they would need to do for it to be enough to kind of nix that? Because it's not going to be a talent thing. Their defense isn't more talented. The scheme isn't better. It's just they're going to have to play out of their minds. Yeah. And so far this season, they haven't done that. They only force 0.14 turnovers per game. Michigan forces 1 per game. What are they going to have to do to kind of mitigate that?
On the Washington side, yeah, it's going to be a real challenge. Like I said, I think that the best comp is Ohio State 2021, 2022, right? CJ Stroud, he's lighting it up in the NFL right now. He's an all-world talent. And in those 2 games, he was getting 400 yards, multiple touchdowns. But the defense just wasn't up to that par, and the running game wasn't up to that par. Right. So defense allowed Hassan Haskins to score 5 touchdowns up the middle in 2021. In 2022, they decided for whatever reason not to cover Cornelius Johnson, and he decided to go for a bunch of yards. And then when they adjusted, then Donovan Edwards was able to get out and do their thing. Right. So it's like a Caleb Williams USC situation. You basically have to play so well to make up for the deficiencies everywhere else. Right. Do I think it's possible? Yeah. Michigan's going to have to make some mistakes, a la TCU, right? Shoot itself in the foot a couple of times, a la TCU.
A lot.
I think that's basically the example game I have in mind of like how Washington can win is go back to watch TCU and how they beat Michigan. And that's basically what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to play amazing, take part of every mistake Michigan makes and flip it around to their advantage. I think it's going to be tough for them to win. But they do have, in my view, I think they have the best quarterback. I think he's better than Jaden Daniels. Sorry, Heisman voters, but I think he's better than Jaden Daniels. Based on what he's been able. You take Penix out of the game, I don't think it's the same team whatsoever. He's an incredible quarterback, and he's going to get his, just like CJ Stroud got his those 2 years.
Yep. And even going back to this year's Ohio State game, Ohio State, for all intents and purposes, won the box score, right? They had almost a full yard per play advantage. They had more total yards. But Marvin Harrison Jr., he got 118. He got his. That's something Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to do. But outside of that, Fleming with only 58 yards, Emeka Egbuka, 25 yards. Mm-hmm. So, it's one of those things where we talk about Rome Odunze, we talk about Jalen Polk, but this is a defense that's shown that, you may be able to get your star, free and loose a couple times. Mm-hmm. However, Michigan also has the depth to be able to stick with the second and third options, especially in a high caliber offense like this. And if they can really key in on Odunze and limit the other guys, then it's going to be really tough sledding for Washington.
Yeah, you look at Will Johnson, you look at who we have in the secondary, Mikey Sanderstill, Rod Moore. These are big playmakers who made big plays when it counted. You mentioned the Ohio State game. He's the reason Ohio State didn't come back to win that game, right? Yep. He made a crucial interception at a crucial time. But earlier in that game, Will Johnson outdueled MHJ to be able to get that interception. He didn't outduel him the whole game because there's no expectation of that. But the fact that we have a guy that can go one-on-one with Marvin Harrison Jr. Is pretty cool, because normally you'd have to double cover somebody like that. And then you have the depth, like the Sandra Stills and the Ron Moores and the Keon Sabs, and this depth that we have to cover these receivers. I think you're gonna see. I think that part of the ideal scenario would be 1 or 2 picks. And Will Johnson and Rod Moore and Sanders still have shown that they can get picks in extremely key moments.
Yep. And capping off that Ohio State performance and talking about the box score, for what it's worth, what Michigan did to win that game is they won the turnover battle, which they are second in the league in turnovers per game, but they are one of the best in turnover margin. Whereas Washington's down in the 60th range. And so Michigan did what they did to win that game. They may not win on the yards, in the box score and the yards per play, but what they do is they won on the turnovers and the time of possession. And that's something that maybe, Washington may be able to flash a lot in this game, but it's one of those things, like you look at the Rutgers game, for instance. Rutgers defense came out motivated, fired up, physical in that first half, because Rutgers is a very physical team. But Michigan trusted what they do and just kind of pushed forward and won the battle of attrition and just wore that Rutgers defense completely out.
Yeah. Well, and you also have to keep in mind the penalties.
Yeah.
So that's another key differential. Michigan's number 2 in the country for penalty yards per game. Washington is 129th in the country.
Very good point.
With 49-23. So Washington has to play way more disciplined if they have any shot, because penalties will kill your drives. And you want to talk about how high octane Penix is, and all credit and all flowers to him. But if that penalty differential stays in place in this game, they're going to have a long night.
Yep.
So we've spent the last 5 minutes talking about some ideal Michigan situations. Let's kind of switch sides a little bit. We're going to make our official predictions at the end of the game. And, spoiler alert, Justin's on one side, I'm on the other. I agree with your point earlier where you said if there's 10 ways to win this game, I think Michigan has 8 of them. I think there's only 1 or 2 ways that Washington's going to win this game. And this is just the way I'm looking at it. Like, that actually opening coin toss might actually be pretty important in this particular game, because if Washington can score on their first drive, build a little confidence. Michigan itself is a good offense, but not necessarily great. So if for whatever reason they have not just a 3 and out, but they don't score on the return possession, and Washington then has a chance to go up 10 points or 14 points, putting a little pressure on the Wolverines. Do you think? Or let me rephrase this. I know Jim Harbaugh has the utmost confidence in J.J. McCarthy, calling him the greatest quarterback in Michigan history. How confident are you that J.J.'s capable of, being the guy that's going to carry you to victory? Because I agree with you. When it comes to your offensive line, your running game, hold on to the ball, that boa constrictor analogy that you used, I completely agree with you on that one. But there's a game script here.
Yep.
Where, Washington takes a very early lead.
Yes.
And all of a sudden they've got that momentum. And Penix with that momentum, it's a very dangerous combination. So should Michigan go down 10, 14 points, do you think JJ's got the type of moxie talent to bring Michigan back ultimately?
Yes. This is actually a great point that I've been mulling around about how important the coin flip might be. Because I think if Michigan always defers, but I think if Michigan wins, they should actually go on offense first and set that grinded out time of possession thing. Because I agree with you. If Washington gets the ball first, they could have a seven points pretty quick, even with our defense. Washington can overcome that to score quick. But does JJ have that dog in him? JJ has that dog in him. And if there was any doubt in my mind, there were 2 moments that showed me that he has that. The first one was 2022 when I went to the Illinois game and Blake Corum was down and like literally.
John, just for the record, I'm an Illinois fan, so that game brings up very sour memories for me. Where, yeah.
But he had to thatch together out of a piece of string and like literally third and fourth string running backs and nothing. He managed to do enough to have Jake Moody kick that field goal. So that was time number one. And time number two was a game called Alabama, which just happened on Monday. I was so impressed with JJ being able, because he had a great first couple of drives and things were kind of going Michigan's way. Michigan was ahead, right? Michigan, maybe not as much as they wanted to be. There was a couple of opportunities they missed, special teams issues, but they were still ahead. They were good enough to be ahead. And then what happens? The greatest coach of all time makes adjustments, goes to more man coverage, and really does create problems for us in the third quarter. So JJ and Michigan and Sharon Moore had to put together drives at the end of that game, which I was impressed with, not just the play design, the pre-snap motion, the things that they did to get Michigan open, but also just how they were able to march down the field, how they were able to make like that flea flicker, which JJ had to be extremely athletic and dynamic to catch that ball with one hand and then swing it to Roman Wilson with like 1 millisecond to go before he got trucked, right? That's an athletic as hell play that like Patrick Mahomes and maybe a couple others could make, right? So he was able to do that. He was able to get it out to Blake Corum on the edge for on the perimeter, and he was able to get one. And you started to see between that and overtime, JJ has that ability to win a game because he just demonstrated to you that he could do it against the best of the best, right? Against the best coach that's ever coached college football. So the answer is yes, but it's not just JJ, right? I think there's not enough talking about Blake Corum we could do. Blake Corum is the it factor in this game. I firmly believe if Blake Corum had played against TCU, we would have been in the national championship, even with every other mistake that was made, because that Philly special never would have been called because Blake Corum would have punched it in.
Yep.
That other score where they were half a yard away and they fumbled wouldn't have happened because Blake Corum would have punched it in. I could see Blake Corum going for as many as 8 yards a carry. And the reason is because Washington allowed Texas 6.4.
Yep.
And Blake Corum, I think, has an even better I think he's one of the best running backs at his best, and he hasn't been at his best, but at his best, I think he's one of the best running backs in college football this year. So he is going to be a major it factor in this game. If he can go out for 250 yards, then the pass is a bonus because Washington's pass defense sucks. Yep. So on top of that, then you just use the pass, the play action, and everything else to really get back. So in your scenario, Sonny, I absolutely think they could answer back, and they've demonstrated in those couple of occasions that JJ's able to orchestrate that.
Just to piggyback on the Blake Corum talk, I do want to say for the gamblers watching this show, my biggest bet of the game is Blake Corum scoring 2 touchdowns at plus 145. I just think there's a lot of good value there. Mm-hmm. And so that's my personal biggest bet.
Yep. Before we get into the predictions, just wanted to do a quick little rapid fire, positional by positional advantage, and just see, John, what you think, which team you think has the advantage in each of these aspects. So running back room, which team would you give the advantage to running back room in? I think that one's pretty obvious.
Yeah, definitely Michigan due to the injury.
Yep.
On the other
side. Wide receivers.
Definitely Washington.
Okay. Offensive line.
This is a hard one.
Yeah, that's probably the closest one we're going to discuss.
Yeah.
Because the first 10 games of the season, I would have said Washington. But Carson Barnhart, I don't think he was in the right position before.
Mm-hmm.
Right guard feels like his position. Trente at right tackle. Even with Zach Zinner going down, I actually think they've improved slightly at line from those games. And but Washington did win the Joe Moore Award.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give the edge slightly to Washington.
Yeah, that one can almost be a push in my opinion, depending on the game. Defensive line.
Michigan by far.
Linebackers.
I'm probably going to give Michigan every defensive.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Probably. I didn't even ask quarterback because Penix.
Yeah.
Probably the obvious.
Well, let's break that one for a second.
Okay, all right, let's go.
Because I think it depends on your category.
Should we rewind 20 minutes ago where John said he was the best quarterback, Penix was the best quarterback, and now all of a sudden.
Well, I'm going to say here's what I'm going to say about that. I do think he's the best quarterback from a passing yard perspective, and I'd even maybe give him best period. But JJ has a couple of things going for him that Penix doesn't, right? He has his running ability. Penix can run, but nowhere near the level when JJ's healthy. Also, like I said, I think his ability to be athletic, to do things like he did with the flea flicker, to make plays happen in NFL tight windows. Penix can do that too.
Yep.
I'll still give the edge a little bit to Penix. I called it a draw on the other show, but it's so, in my mind, if we're just looking at the passing yards and we're looking at the explosiveness and what he's been able to do the whole season, Penix. But JJ's been injured 4 games. He's now healthy. And I think you're going to see, for the first time since probably like the Minnesota game or the Purdue game, you're going to see JJ light it up.
And just to kind of almost double down on your point there, I think like when you say that, right, Penix is obviously the one who carries his team, right? He's the guy that without him, that team would be crazy, or crazy in not a good way, right? It would be the drastic change that he makes in improving that offense. But what JJ McCarthy does is he fits perfectly into what Michigan does well. And so I think just looking at it from the game perspective, that's kind of, alluding to your point, just what McCarthy is able to do in this offense and they play to his strengths closes that gap significantly, where Penix is kind of a do-it-all, type of guy. And they're very reliant on him. Whereas I don't think Michigan's as reliant on JJ McCarthy. So I don't think as much as pressure is put on him. And of course, he doesn't have to carry as much of the load, which is going to impact his numbers as well.
Yeah, and real quick, also the QBR aspect as well. So Penix has the edge in passing yards and in touchdowns. But if you look at QBR, JJ's actually third with 89.5. Penix is sixth with 85.7. And that speaks to the running ability that JJ has, because that's what they look at when they look at QBR, is the overall, like, what kind of effectiveness and dual threat and like what is he bringing to the table in all these different areas.
Yeah, for those that don't know, QBR factors in a lot of things as far as efficiency goes. They factor sacks, turnovers, the whole nine. It's one of those. It's flawed just like any other, but it's probably the most accurate as in terms of just giving us the overall feel for how the quarterback performs into game script, and not just the other stats can be skewed. If it's a garbage time game where they're playing prevent and they're just nickel and diming their way down the field, getting completions and yards. QBR kind of helps take a lot of that out of the equation for those that didn't know what that is. Sonny, anything before we get into the predictions?
Yeah, actually, I have one more question. So, John, as soon as the trophy is raised, whether Michigan wins or Michigan loses, immediately questions are going to arise about your head coach, which happens every offseason.
Yeah.
Jim Harbaugh, whether he signs that extension, which, supposedly your AD says that they're working on. Obviously, now there was news this week, I think, Jim Harbaugh got a new agent who represents a lot of NFL guys. Mm-hmm. What do you think? I'm going to ask you 2 questions. What do you think is going to happen? And what would you do in his situation?
Ooh. Okay. So I did a show on this with Michigan Wolverines live back months and months ago called The Last Dance. And we literally, I predicted that he was going to the Raiders at that point. Mm-hmm. This was even before Signgate, because I thought this is the team with 78% returning production. NIL bringing all these people back for another year, this felt like the team that was either going to win it all or come damn close. And then Jim Harbaugh would look. Imagine you're at the Harbaugh Thanksgiving table.
That's a boring table.
and John, he's got that Super Bowl ring, and you two both know how insanely competitive Jim Harbaugh is.
Oh yeah,
and that has to eat at him like nothing else. So if he wins the national, I think regardless, he's going, and I do think Michigan's going to win. But I think either way, I think Harbaugh needs to go chase that Super Bowl. But here's the thing. It needs to be the right situation for him. We know what happened at the 49ers when he didn't get along with the GM. We know, there were a lot of issues there. He said to an actual owner, this meeting's reserved for men. I mean, he was a little bit prickly when it came to the NFL.
Yeah.
So it needs to be the right situation for him, the right ownership group, and the control that he wants, because he's going to want total. So Jerry Jones isn't going to be the right fit for him in terms of a place. That's why the Raiders, I think, is an incredible opportunity, because he has a great relationship with Mark Davis. He had a great relationship with Al Davis. He has a great relationship with Tom Brady, the new minority owner. And so I think that they would be willing to give him the control that he wants. They have good draft picks, and he could go get JJ. He could go get Blake Corum. I mean, he could actually get probably a decent chunk of these players. Not everybody, but he could probably get JJ. He could probably get Blake. He could probably get like Keegan. He could probably get a defender or two, mixed in with some others, of course, some other talent across the country. But just imagine, I mean, he could easily put together the Las Vegas Wolverines.
Yep.
Really quick. Call up Vic Fangio if Jesse Minter won't come. He could call up his buddy Vic Fangio. Offensively, he might get Pep Hamilton again. I don't know. I don't know what he would do there, but I think Sharon Moore would probably be the next head coach, so he probably wouldn't come. But it could be a Pep Hamilton situation or somebody else. But he has his people that he can call, and if he said, "Hey, I'm going to be running it back in Las Vegas. Want to go win a Super Bowl with me?" I think a couple of people would take his call.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, it could be one of those situations, let's look at the Texans, for instance, and for full transparency, I'm a Texans fan, but it's a couple examples of what you're talking about. The Texans let Bill O'Brien kind of run the show. They basically gave him the GM position and was like, here, if you're going to succeed here, we're going to give you the keys. And that failed miserably.
Yeah.
So it can go poorly, but when you're in a situation like Harbaugh, and I think he's a great football mind, I think his personnel decisions will be, right on point. I think Bill O'Brien was a little bit overrated as a coach, as we have found out. And then waiting for the right situation. The same thing, Texans. D'Amico Ryans, a couple years back, Texans drafted him. He played, many years there, and he turned the Texans job down 2 years ago. So it could be one of those situations to stay, as a defensive coordinator in San Francisco, and it worked out for him in the long run. So, it has worked out for people in the past to just kind of stick around and hang out and wait for the right position. And I would almost wonder if he wants to wait for a spot where he can go get his own quarterback, kind of like D'Amico did, where, he's in a situation where they have a pick high enough to where maybe he can go get his own quarterback, and, kind of build his own team based on that. So what are your thoughts on that? And do you think there's a specific situation that he would want to go into?
So I'm just doing a quick scan of where the Raiders are. It looks like 11th. Is their first draft pick,
which could get them one of these, that good quarterbacks. Yeah,
could get them JJ.
Yeah,
I don't think
maybe
Caleb is probably going higher. Drake May is probably going higher. Maybe another. So I think there's absolutely the possibility that he gets JJ in that position, and then after that, you just go from there. I think the Raiders are absolutely the perfect situation for him with the jobs that are open now. The Michigan will match apparently whatever is offered, but I think what we've seen is Sharon Moore being essentially groomed for the head coaching role.
Yeah,
and we've seen that this year. Because if you remember, there was the musical chairs coaching in the beginning, where Harbaugh basically treated it like NFL preseason, and then settled on Sharon Moore as the interim. And for this last round, Sharon Moore beat Penn State. Sharon Moore beat Ohio State. And I think he's been prepped for the role this last season to take over. I think Jim Harbaugh's probably gone, regardless of what happens, especially with the NCAA. Who knows what's going to happen? I don't think it's going to be as devastating as some of our rivals think it's going to be as far as punishment, because we could go a whole rabbit hole on why I think the bylaw was not broken, and we'll probably get some suspensions, but I don't think, people hoping for 36 vacated wins and a vacated title, I think are going to be a little disappointed. But I think Sharon Moore is probably going to be the head coach next year.
Should he decide to leave, what's going to be the temperature with the fan base? Like, obviously, a lot of people didn't like him 4 years ago or getting ready to get rid of him. Let's say he wins the national championship on Monday. Is it going to be like a positive send-off? Like, thanks, you're a Michigan man. Thank you for everything. We get it.
Yeah, at 1,000,000%. Yeah. He came in here and he wanted 4 goals to happen: beat Michigan State, beat Ohio State, win the Big Ten championship, win the national championship. Those were the 4 goals that he promised the fans that he would set out to achieve. If he wins the national championship, then all 4 of those goals have been achieved. And he's done. And I think Michigan would happily send him off, even if they don't win. This is the first time Michigan has ever been in the national championship game since it was instituted in '98, right? So basically, so I think the fans would, they know that Sharon Moore is in the wings. Yep. They know that Jim Harbaugh has wanted a Super Bowl and was this close to a Super Bowl before, and they know how competitive he is. So all he has to do is say, look, we accomplished all our goals, and just like these players want to go to the NFL and do great things, and I want to go to the NFL and win a Super Bowl. And, I'm always going to love the program and be here for whatever the program needs. And Sharon Moore, I've made sure you're in good hands with Sharon Moore.
One last question from me.
Yeah.
Let's say the Wolverines win the national championship.
Yeah.
Is this the best Michigan team of all time?
You'd have to think it's up there, right? 97. Mm-hmm. And obviously it's hard to go back all the way to the 40s and before that because of how different
97 was what I was essentially thinking about, but Desmond Howard himself.
You want to talk about 97?
Oh,
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was comparing it with, but Desmond Howard himself on TV, I think a day or two ago, said that if they win tomorrow, this team is the best Michigan team of all time.
Charles Woodson, who was on the 97 team, said the same thing. Mm-hmm. If they
maybe that I might have mixed my Michigan players.
Oh, okay. Charles Woodson on the 97 team, he basically said if they win the Natty, then they're the best team.
That's what I meant.
So I think that's all you really need to know about that. If Charles Woodson is saying it.
My 97 joke probably didn't land with Sonny, but as a Husker fan, there's history in that 97 season about the polls and championship. So that's where I was going with that. But I agree. I think this is probably the best Michigan team that I've seen. I was there live. The one game I went to this year was the Michigan game in Lincoln, and that was a bloodbath. I was apologizing to my girlfriend for that being her first game. I was like, I'm so sorry.
Because that was the first game.
The life sucked out of the stadium so fast. So we'll go ahead and carry this over into the predictions. Sonny, let's go ahead. You're the one Washington pick here. So go ahead and give us your breakdown and why you think Washington is going to win.
I mean, it's not much of a breakdown. It's basically, I've watched Washington maybe 4 or 5 times this year. Both Oregon matchups, this college last week, and I forgot a game earlier. The USC game.
Yeah.
All right. And so for me, I don't need to talk about the Oregon games or the game last week because I'm assuming most of us saw it. But that USC game was one of those games where, we talk about Michigan taking advantage of Washington's defense. Washington seems to have the swagger to them. And ultimately, this is what it's going to come down to. I just think there's some sort of magic with Penix and these receivers that every time I, bet against them, which has been pretty much every single game. So I'm watching and they prevail somehow. So that particular game, I'm thinking about USC. It was almost to the point where they would let USC score because they were so confident at that point. Like, hey, we'll come back and we're going to score ourselves. So what I'm not banking on it. I'm just, for the sake of debate and conversation, I'm going under the scenario that I brought up earlier in the show, that all of a sudden Washington somehow gets a 2-possession lead. And then that puts some pressure on JJ and Michigan. Now, if there's any team in the country that can handle that pressure, I understand it's Michigan. But again, if I don't have analytics to back this one up, but this Washington team offensively is so much fun to watch. You have 3 potential first-round wide receivers, and that extra magic that I keep betting on. I've learned my lesson. I'm just going to say, Washington prevails. It's going to be a 38-27 game over.
Whoa!
Jeez.
Not just a win, but a pretty decisive win.
Well, I think the game has to go over if Washington's going to win. Because then all of a sudden you're gonna if the game goes under, that means Michigan is milking that clock. They're running the ball. I think we're talking about quick scores on the Washington side to the point where Michigan has to adjust their offense. Like if you're down in the third quarter by 3 possessions, you can't really count on Edwards or Corum to eat up all the clock because you need to get some of those points back. So. As we talked about earlier, there's a bunch of game scripts that Michigan can win by. There's really only one, in my opinion, that Washington's going to win by, and I'm just counting on that one to happen, and that's going to start with that coin flip.
Yep, and I'll give it to John to end it so he can give his overall thoughts, and so I'll go a little bit into kind of why I think Michigan win. First off, Michigan, I think, has been the best team in college football throughout the entire season. They've been consistent. I feel like the cheating controversy has brought them together as a unit more so than it separated them, which is what people expected. I think there's a lot to be said about that. I think this is a team rallying around its coach. I think it's a team rallying around each other. And it's going to be hard to beat a team that works as well as a unit as this one. Sonny, you alluded to, them potentially getting ahead and needing to control the clock. That's just something Washington hasn't done. Their time possession essentially is even with their opponents this season. And then, like I mentioned, Michigan's 13th, in overall time of possession. So I think it's just one of those things where the matchup is too steep. Like John was saying with the TCU game last year, Michigan basically did everything wrong in that first half and just ran out of time when they mounted their comeback. It's going to take a lot of mistakes, I think, for Washington to do, anything. I do think Washington's better than that TCU team, but I also think this Michigan team's better than last year's Michigan team. I just think they're going to get it done. I think probably it's a 7 to 10 point game. I have my prediction written down here. Where did it go? I have 31-24 Michigan. And I think it's one of those things where they may be up 10 late. Washington comes down and kicks a field goal. I think it's one of those things where Michigan's going to control that second half, especially. It may be close in the first half. Washington may even have the lead, but I think the second half's where the difference is going to happen. So, John, let's go ahead and get to yours.
Yeah. And I want to thank you both for having me as well. It's really fantastic. And if you want to hear more about what we talk about, we just did a special edition of Michigan Wolverines Live with Tony Altimore as well. So that's on the Michigan Voice of College Football channel.
We'll link that in the description as well. So we'll link that video and then John's channel and all of his socials as well.
Love it. So check that out. And then normally on Mondays, we do Big Ten Live, and I host a show called the Ocho, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, with the Voice of College Football community panel being on that. This week, we'll be doing a little different with the national championship, but we will have a post-game show with Mark, and I'll be on that for a bit as well. So stay tuned to Michigan Wolverines Live Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern and the Ocho. So in terms of the prediction and what I'm thinking, Justin, you said a lot of the things that I would have said in terms of it's the best team in the country. They've been through adversity. You can argue it's self-inflicted. You can argue it's whatever. They've still been through it. They had 6 games without their head coach, and they still beat top 10 opponents. That shows that the team has rallied. They're clearly a very tight-knit group. The offense can be explosive when it wants to be. It just hasn't needed to be for the last, 7 or 8 games for the most part. But it can be explosive. Yeah. It can match Washington, I think, especially with how bad Washington's, no offense, but how bad Washington's defense is, 94th in the country. I think Michigan's going to be able to if it is a shootout, I think Michigan would be able to at least come close to matching. But then when you add Michigan's defense into it as well, what they can do, both the interior D line, I think, is going to try to stop Penix. Meanwhile, you've got your secondary, Will Johnson, Mike Sanders still. They only need to do 1 or 2 picks to really impact the game. We talked about penalties. That's a big one. Yeah. The differential with penalties, second in the country versus 129th in the country. That might be the big difference. Is you have a team that's very disciplined, that's very tight-knit, that's very together, that can control the time of possession, but they can also play high octane too.
Yeah.
And that's really deadly. So I think with all that said, Michigan just has too many paths to victory. And Washington, like you said, Sonny, they have that one. And I'm going 34-23 Michigan.
Yep. Yeah. And 31-23 set?
34-23.
34-23. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And to your point about the offense and just everybody, something to keep in mind, Michigan has blown out a lot of teams this year. So the offensive numbers could have been a lot more than they are, but they haven't had to be just because, they've played by the 40, 50-point leads this season at times. And Washington, like, their defense has gotten them into shootouts. So that's another thing that factors in. And that's why, I think Sonny's point earlier about the offense, I think it's a little bit skewed as far as if you look at just the numbers for that reason, because it doesn't really tell the story of how good that J.J. McCarthy in that Nebraska game was making some absurd throws, and those receivers were making insane catches. I think that offense is a lot more dynamic than people give them credit for. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to our special here. John, thank you so much for your time, man. Is there anything you want to put out extra before we sign off here?
No, listen, again, I appreciate you guys having me. Definitely check out Voice of College Football and all the different things that we're doing for the next couple of days. Keep it tuned with Mark Rogers and myself as we do all the different things that we're going to do to promote the game and to talk about it afterwards. And other than that, all the Michigan fans who might be watching, go Blue.
Yep. And, like I said, everything will be leaked in the description too. I also work over at the Voice of College Football Network on the Nebraska channel. So if you're a Husker fan, you can go over there and check that out as well. A lot of good things going on at the Voice of College Football with Mark Rogers. Sonny, Illini Cast, you can get him at the Illini Cast. That will be in the description as well. Sonny, anything before we sign off?
Nope. John, thanks again for your time. I got to say, I think it's our last show before the actual kickoff tomorrow. And I'm really looking forward to this game of just the contrast of styles. I think it's going to be a really fun game to not only watch, but kind of see where the future of Big Ten football is going. Because we're going to get that influence of those Washington style offenses mixed with the traditional, prototypical Big Ten teams like Michigan. So it's kind of a preview of what the future is going to look like. So I'm really excited to see that.
And it's going to be nice to look at too. We got all blue uniforms versus all whites.
Yep. Yep, it's going to be a fun one, man. Super excited. So again, John, thanks for being on the show. Everybody, if you like what we're doing here at the Big Ten Show, please consider liking, subscribing. If you are a fan of any Big Ten team, we will be covering all of them, breaking news, etc. So just stay tuned for what we got coming here. A lot of good things coming. So with that being said, we are going to go ahead and take it to the close. Everybody enjoy the game Monday, and pop back in here if we got our predictions wrong, and let us know about it. So, and join John next week on the Michigan channel so you can harass him if Washington wins. So, all right, guys. We'll catch everybody in the next episode. Peace.